Right then, let's go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 40 of the 2-on-1 Powerchair Football Podcast, powered by MK Battery. This season, MK Battery continue their incredible support, powering this podcast and every one of the 11 National League weekends in the 25-26 season. Their backing helps us keep growing the visibility of Powerchair Football, ensuring more people can follow and fall in love with the sport at every level. My name is Ryan Sipple, and today we're taking things international, joined by someone who's been right at the heart of Powerchair Football's growth and success in Australia. Over the past few years, she's become one of the leading figures within the national program, representing her country on the world stage and experiencing the incredible pressure and privilege of competing at a home World Cup in Sydney back in 2023. Fast forward to 2025, and she's fresh off another major success, playing a key role in Australia's APO Cup triumph in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago, the Continental Championship for Asia, Pacific and Oceania, a tournament that not only crowned them champions of that part of the world, but also secured qualification for the 2026 Fit for Powerchair Football World Cup in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She's lived through the highs and the challenges of a developing national structure, witnessed the sport's evolution across a vast country, and continues to make a real impact both on the court and within the wider Powerchair football community. Today's episode is a chance to unpack that journey, and from those first steps to the sport, to the pride of representing Australia, to what lies ahead on the world stage in 2026. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Rebecca Evans to the podcast. Rebecca, how are you?
Very good, thank you, Ryan. Thank you for your amazing introduction.
You're absolutely welcome. It's taken a little bit of time to organise this one. That between our busy schedules and the 11-hour time difference, which I still managed to get wrong. So whilst our listeners won't be aware of the time and place that this is being recorded, I was late. So I'll get that out on record and give my apologies. It's approaching 8 p.m. over in Melbourne, right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
And I'm just shy of 9 a.m. here, south of London. So it's a pretty good compromise for us both. And I mean, having done a lot of the work in the build up to the World Cup in Sydney back in 2023, I remember setting alarms at all hours of the night to link up with people in Australia. So this one feels like a much nicer balance. Have things calmed down slightly since that APO Cup win? I can imagine it was a pretty hectic few weeks with the preparation, the competition itself, and then everything that's followed since.
Definitely. So, leading into the APO Cup, we had a 5-day training before the competition started to really get us ramped up and at the top of our form. And then it was quite an intense schedule. We had 3 matches every day for 2 days, and then the semi-finals and finals on the 3rd day. So quite a bit more intense than the World Cup. But it was amazing to get back to international competition. It was the Poweroos' first time playing an international match since the World Cup. So quite a big 2-year gap for us. So it was amazing to be back and amongst it all.
Yeah. Before we get into the APO, the World Cup, Australia's rise on the international stage, I want to go back to the beginning, if you don't mind, to the start of your journey, because when we look at achievements like Sydney in 2023, qualification in Brisbane, and the national championships, which we'll also get onto, it's easy to forget that every story starts somewhere far simpler. A first session, a first team, a first moment where you realize there's almost an entire world of competition and community behind this sport. How did you
So
first discover Powerchair football, and what do you remember from those early occasions?
coming to you from Melbourne today, but I actually started in Western Australia, where I was born and grew up. So yeah, I initially came across Powerchair sports more generally in 2016. Um, at that time in Australia, there were several different forms of Powerchair sports being played. So I started off playing hockey. And it wasn't until 2018 that I started Powerchair football. Some of the players that were playing the other forms of the sport suggested I give it a go. And as soon as I played that first match, even though I was in my daycare, I was instantly hooked. Compared to the other Powerchair sports, Powerchair football was a sport where I could play totally independently and where my level of disability didn't restrict my ability and my potential to succeed in the sport. So it was ultimately the reason why I switched to solely playing Powerchair football.
And what year was that? Sorry,
2018.
2018. It amazes me that the amount of players and people I speak to, and they go through a very similar process to that. They dip their toe in a number of different disability sports, but never really capture the essence of what sport is all about. It's about that community, that independence. Um, and Powerchair football, we're biased, we will say it, but it does that better than most, I certainly think.
I always say it was during that time period I had just left high school. So I was kind of trying to still find my place in the world and what I wanted to do. And as soon as I found Powerchair football, I say that I found my tribe. And still to this day, it's where the majority of my support networks and my friends come from. So definitely it changed multiple aspects of my life from the day I found Powerchair football.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you've discovered the sport and you're starting to get involved. I often find the next phase can often be the most demanding, because even now, Powerchair football comes with challenges for players all over the world. It's the specialist equipment. It's incredibly expensive. Funding's limited. And for many players, gaining access to regular high quality sessions isn't always as simple as it sounds. Certainly in Australia, you have things like travel distances, inconsistent schedules, logistical demands around training and competition that can all create barriers that require real commitment to stay involved. And the reality is, those challenges aren't necessarily unique to Australia, they're shared across the sport globally. So I'm interested in your experience of that early stage, that period where enthusiasm, so to speak, meets the realities, and where players often have to be resourceful, patient, determined. How prevalent were the sessions, and was it difficult to get going despite your enthusiasm?
I would say definitely yes. All of the things that you just mentioned are applicable to my story. Like I started playing the sport in a daycare, but you don't really get to appreciate the excitement of the sport in a daycare just because of the limitations of that care. And it becomes difficult to obtain a chair like a Strike Force with how expensive they are, getting them imported to Australia, and the increased costs that come with that. So at the moment in Australia, Strike Force can cost around 30,000 Australian dollars, which is quite a lot to butt for a new player. So that's definitely one of the main challenges entering the sport. And then you also have the geographical distance as well. So when I first started playing in Western Australia, we're about a 5 hour flight from the next city that plays Powerchair football to Sydney. So for some players, the first time that they will get to meet other players outside of their club is the once a year national club championships. So they're definitely the two main barriers in terms of entering the sport and then being able to kind of get that high level competition and to beat other players as well.
Yeah, on that point, I know from following your journey closely, certainly in the build up to the World Cup in 2023, just how independent you are and how you've never allowed your disability to limit what you want to achieve. And I think I'm right in saying, to your point, just mentioned, in the lead up to that, or the years leading up to that, you made a huge move relocating from Perth to Melbourne to expose yourself to a higher level of football, all in a bid to push for national team selection or regular high quality activity. And I did a little bit of maths. For our English listeners, this won't mean much to you, Beck. That's, I think, just shy of 3,500 miles. Certainly, when I put it in a maps calculator, and to put that into perspective, that's the equivalent of traveling from Land's End, which is the southernmost point in England, to John O'Groats, which is the northernmost point in Scotland, 6 times. If I said that distance, if I had said that, it's a big challenge, a charitable challenge in England to go from one to the other, and to say that you did that, that's 6 times. It's and more overarching. I think Australia is 32 times bigger than the whole of the UK, which just blows my mind. But that shows the scale of what you're having to navigate and the level of commitment it takes for players to access top level competition. What motivated you to make that move, and how big an impact did it have on you and your development?
I'll definitely say so. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of disrupted the development in Western Australia of Powerchair football. And at that time, I was highly motivated to make the Poweroos team for the World Cup. It was a major goal of mine. And in 2021, I was beginning to recognise that my potential as a Powerchair football athlete was starting to be kind of restricted just because of the limited opportunities in Perth. And compared to England, I can't just travel one town over or an hour drive to access a different team or a different coach. So I eventually made the decision to move out of my family home. I have been living in my family home up until that point, and I made the move to Melbourne on the other side of the country from my family just to access higher level and higher quality Powerchair football. And evidently, luckily, it did pay off, and I did manage to make the World Cup squad. And even outside of Powerchair football, it's one of the best decisions I have made for myself personally. And it's just, yeah, it was very worthwhile. And I'm glad that I kind of took that leap of faith and made the decision to move.
Yeah, hearing that and seeing the lengths you've gone to, it really reinforces something that I'm a huge believer in, which is independence, taking ownership of your journey and being willing to make those big decisions and to move yourself forward. It does take a tremendous amount of commitment, confidence, self-belief, to put yourself in a new environment and embrace the challenges that come with that. And hopefully, I think in time, your example can serve younger players coming through, boys, girls, by showing what's possible when you take that leap, because it was a huge, not a risk, because it's all about life experiences, but a huge, I just said, it's a leap of faith, because you had the belief that you were good enough to get into that Poweroos setup, and that investment to go from one side of the country to the other was going to help that. But it was still the unknown. So it's fascinating. Looking back, every player also has those moments or people who make a real difference along the way. It might be a coach that backed you early on, a teammate who pushed your level, or even an experience that changed how you viewed yourself as a player. And I think those turning points can really shape the direction of a career, especially in a sport where the pathway isn't always straightforward. When you think about your journey so far, who or what have been the biggest influences, the moments or people that have really helped shape your path?
So I've got to say there's three main people in success here. Obviously, even though I'm having success in Melbourne, I've been a miss not to mention my fellow players and coaches in Perth. They are who got me started with the sport and really gave me those base skills and knowledge of the game in order to succeed. Um, but fortunately, I started playing in 2018, so I had all of those 2017 World Cup videos to watch and learn from. And I particularly took inspiration from those. I remember when I first started, my Perth coach showed me this video of Aoife and Tiva playing for Ireland. And he was like, you have been just as impressive as they are. And turns out, yes, I could. So seeing those other female players that turned into role models for me, playing at my international stage, definitely was few people that inspired me along the way. But I'd also say I in the under-21s team at the 2019 APO Cup. That was my first exposure to international matches and international players. And it definitely gave me that motivation to aspire to play for the Poweroos. I saw how cool international tournaments are at how much of a higher level the intensity and the gameplay is. And that really steered my kind of football career and gave me the goals that I wanted to achieve.
That sounds amazing. And to your point of the players in Ireland, representation is so powerful, and sometimes you do need to see it to be it. And we'll get onto that in a little bit, because I want to talk about you being a female in a male-dominated sport and how you've seen an example and you've aspired to be that, and how you're now going to serve as that example, that inspiration for the next generation. But just going back slightly, I want to zoom out the sport for a moment, because players are never defined just by one part of their life, the football. I'd love to hear about more what drives you away from the court. You've taken your education to an incredibly high level, going all the way through to PhD. Can you talk to me about that side of your life, your passions away from the sport, your academic journey, and your ambitions almost beyond Powerchair football?
Yeah, definitely very passionate about disability advocacy and making lives easier for people like myself. So I'm very fortunate to have a role, a paid position as a researcher for a not-for-profit. And as part of that, I am studying a PhD, which is looking into the interaction between support and social participation for people with physical disabilities. So kind of looking about how to support, help or hinder social participation. And I guess that does come from my own experiences of social things like Powerchair Football and seeing how when people have good support teams around them, it enables them to thrive and to be able to participate in things like Powerchair Football. So I'm hoping to use my research to produce resources and materials that help people with disabilities, particularly in Australia, really hone in on how they can best utilize support and support people to enable them to achieve their kind of social participation goals.
Yeah, what's the title of your PhD?
So my title of the PhD is Investigating the Interaction Between Support and Social Participation for People with Physical Disabilities and Acquired Complex Support Needs.
It just rolls off the tongue at this point, irrelevant of how long it is. No, that sounds fantastic. And I love when players really have a passion and they pursue it through education, through work. And we often get taken with this sport is so incredible. It's so amazing, but there is a life outside of it, and ensuring players and people are upskilled as best possible. It always serves this part of their life, being the football. One area I'm particularly keen to explore with you is the experience of being a female player in a sport that certainly at elite level is still very male dominated. There's no hiding away from that. Powerchair football is of course unique, meaning that females and males compete together directly alongside each other, which does create that real fascinating dynamic. There's strength in that inclusivity, but it also brings challenges around representation, visibility, opportunity, which I think is a big one. And that's something I'm personally really passionate about. One of my objectives working with the Wheelchair Football Association in England is to create more opportunities and clearer pathways for female players, because even here in England, where the infrastructure is strong, the female base is growing, there is still a significant amount of barriers to overcome. And I'm sure the situation in Australia carries many similarities. The potential is there, but the numbers, the visibility, the opportunities still need developing. From the outside, you've carved your place at the top level through consistency, performance, contribution, but that doesn't mean there haven't been perceptions or barriers to navigate along the way, whether that's assumptions about ability, maybe being underestimated, or simply being treated differently as a result of your gender. What has your experience been like competing in a mixed gender environment at that top level of the sport, both in terms of the day-to-day interactions and how that dynamic plays out on the court almost?
Yeah, I would say as a female, obviously because archer football is one of the rare sports where it doesn't matter what gender you are, but you can participate. But on the court, it doesn't really matter that I am female. Even if I'm the only female on the court or the only female on the team, I can compete with the best of them, regardless of my disability. But I would say initially as a female player, it was harder to build my profile and to be recognized as a good active player. Just because there are so few females in Australia that people are almost not sure how to approach me or how to treat me. I was almost underestimated when I first started. Like, kind of worked in my favor for the first year or so. But I would get on the courts and people would treat me gingerly, and then I just smashed them in a battle, get around them. And then people started to take me a bit more seriously. And I do feel fortunate that the players, the female players that come after me might benefit from what I've done for the sport so far. I hope that females that come in now kind of see me and see that I have succeeded within Australian powerchair football, and that their journey is a bit smoother. But as you say, there are still so few female players in Australia. At the last National Cup Championships, I was the only Australian female out of all the teams. The only reason I wasn't the only female is because Abby Volt from England came over to play for one of their teams. So I wasn't the only one. But we definitely still have a long way to go in terms of ensuring that our female representation is as good as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask off the top of your head, do you roughly know the male-female breakdown of the sport? But just based on that statement alone, it will be significantly weighted towards male players.
Definitely. So here in Melbourne, we have 2 female players across all of the 3 teams starting here. So it's quite low, and I know, I'm pretty sure New South Wales have a few development females. I met some of them at the World Cup, which was kind of cool. They'd love to to make me seeing a female player achieving at the highest level, but we definitely, where we can, I would see the participant base of Powerchair football means that perhaps we will always be male dominated just because the disabilities that our players have, some of them are linked to males. But it would be great to see some more females in the sport, just so that it's almost like we would attract more female players if we had more female players, because the players will be more comfortable joining their local club or joining the sports, knowing that they got another female player to relate to and to introduce them.
Yeah, to your point a second ago, I think even with supportive teammates, even with inclusive coaches and a really positive environment, there still is the wider context of football and society to consider. Unconscious bias exists everywhere. And in a mixed gender sport, it can sometimes show up in subtle ways, even when no one intends it. Think, as you've, to your point, feeling that you have to prove yourself a little bit more, feeling the need to overperform, or sensing you're almost being judged, I think you said gingerly, differently, to create it's a pressure that others might not fully see. So I think it's really important to address it how you have. Let your football do the talking, but it's the stuff associated and the baggage associated with that prior to getting out onto the court, which sometimes can prove a real barrier for young females to overcome. Thinking ahead to the next generation, because as we've discussed, visibility and representation play such a huge role. There will no doubt be young girls, not just in Australia, but around the world, watching you, following your journey and seeing almost what's possible. And that early encouragement, as it was for you watching Ema and Aoife from Ireland, it's a sense of there's a place for me here. There's something to aspire to be. And it makes all the difference, certainly when you're just starting out. For girls who are beginning their journey or thinking about getting involved in Powerchair football, what advice would you pass on, both from what you've experienced and what you've learned along the way?
I would say to females that are potentially looking to join the sport, even if there are no female players in your area, don't let that stop you from trying the sport. And I'd also say, in this day and age, we can all use social media to our advantage. I'm on social media, and really anyone that wants to join the sport, I'd encourage them to reach out to me if they feel like they want a female mentor to help them introduce them to the sport. And I'm sure there's other female players out there who would be happy to be contacted with any questions. So if they just want to kind of network with someone that's already done it and that's already integrated themselves within the sport. So I'd say just get out there, give it a go, and reach out if you want support.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice. At the recent APO, how many, was there any other female players present at that competition? If so, how many?
I guess there was 4 of us. So there was myself, and then there was 2 players for the Japanese team and 1 player for the Republic of Korea.
Very interesting. Having experienced the European Championships, I think there was about 5 or 6 females, which sounds encouraging without the context. But when you consider it was a 10-team competition and there was upwards of 80 players there, it sadly just isn't good enough. It doesn't even register 10% of the overall players. So it's something I would most certainly want to address. Our attention will soon turn to the America's Cup, the qualifying event on that part of the planet. And again, I'm intrigued to see the male-female breakdown. I know there's Lexi here from the United States of America. There's Lucia Barbosa from Uruguay. But I would love for it to represent more than a 10% overall breakdown. One area I'd love to dig in to with you is the landscape of Powerchair football in Australia, because for many of our listeners, especially those based in England, it's something they might not fully understand, the structure, the distances, the logistics, and just the overall way the sport operates, which is no doubt very different to what we do here in England. To start with, can you give us a sense of how the competitions work in Australia, the leagues, the cups, the camps almost, and what that looks like across such a huge country?
Yeah, so in Australia, we are kind of broken down into states. So we have Victoria, where I live, then New South Wales have their own league, Queensland have their own league, as do Adelaide and Western Australia. So we are all very separated in terms of our league, unlike England, which gets together all of their teams for weekends at a time to play their league. In Australia, the Australian players only really get together once a year for our national club championships. Outside of that, we play our local leagues, which look different depending on which state they live in. So New South Wales is leading the way in terms of how they approach football and how their league is structured. So they have a really good Division 1 and a Division 2, as well as development opportunities. Whereas states like Victoria, we're still developing in how we structure things and our teams. We really only have one or two good, strong clubs. And even in Victoria, we only have 3 clubs in total. So you play the same 2 teams week out until you get to the once a year club championships. So that makes development really tricky. Just because of how, as we said, geographically isolated we all are. So even when it comes to Poweroos and our traded camps, the minimum we have to drive is 8 hours to find the nearest Poweroos in another state. So that makes training camps really tricky. And since the World Cup, we've only run 6 training camps in 2 years. And that's also because we are ourselves personally responsible for funding those training camps, just because we don't receive any funding. So that means we're paying for our own flights and our own accommodation for us and our support workers for every training camp, every tournament, which logistically makes it difficult to get together very regularly.
Yeah, massively. I recently had the pleasure of spending some time with Christy Eden, the president of the Australian Powerchair Football Association, when she was over in England last week, and we spoke about how the sport operates across both countries, the similarities, the differences, and the unique challenges posed by Australia's size and geography, and of course that funding element, which we almost take for granted here in England. We have the fantastic backing of the Football Association. So when it comes to national team training camps or the program that supports that, it's all funded by them. And that's something that we're incredibly fortunate about, and something that is a huge barrier for players such as yourself, not to mention the 8-10 hours minimum traveling across the country, because it did really highlight in England we do benefit from a concentrated network of teams and the ability to hold national competitions on a regular basis. Pretty much on every weekend of the year, there will be some sort of power chair activity taking place here, whether that's leagues, cups, camps, or other. And that just simply isn't realistic in a country the size of Australia, where travel alone becomes that significant factor. Have you had much of a chance to follow Powerchair football here in England?
Definitely, I watch all of your premiership matches, studying all of your tactics and players. But it really is what you're doing, which is really the old style, what we all want Powerchair football in our nations to look like. How you have the premiership and the championship, your development pathways, how well supported your England team is. I think that's really where Australia aspire to be. Obviously, we have a long way to go, and a lot of things to work out to get there. But that's definitely where we aspire to be.
Well, as mentioned, having spoken to Christy, she has this obsession, healthy obsession of making the sport better, putting it on the map and looking to take best practice from the likes of England and the US and take that back to what you're doing in Australia. We are incredibly fortunate here. There's no question about that. um, but you've got the passion, you've got the talent, you've got the drive. It's just funding and geography which makes everything that little bit tougher. But hopefully we're on to something really special soon, and all of these issues will be a thing of the past. You mentioned within Australia's structure that you have your national club championships held once a year, where all of the top teams come together in one place for a full week, battle it out to be crowned national champions. A huge event, and for many players, yourself included, I'm sure it's the absolute highlight of the domestic calendar. Firstly, congratulations, because you were part of the Melbourne City squad that won the title for the very first time back in March, I believe. A massive achievement for any club, and it must have been an incredible moment to be part of. How did you find that experience, and where does it rank amongst your achievements in the sport so far?
And it was definitely incredible. Ever since I started playing, Newcastle Jets are kind of the gold standard team in Australia, and it's been a few years of us building up Melbourne City to get to that level as well. So to see it finally pay off at the National Club Championships was just incredible. To also play with Chris Gordon, who featured as a marquee player for us, that was a really cool experience as well. But it was just really nice to see all of our hard work pay off. And obviously, my move to Melbourne, not only was it for the Poweroos, but it was also to see the Melbourne teams and Melbourne City get better as well. So it was nice to look at the trophy at the end.
I can imagine it was. How many national club championships have you played in prior to that?
I would have played in, so that was my third with Melbourne City, and then I played two before that with Perth Glory.
And what is your highest finish amongst those 5 or 6 championships?
So my highest was there.
Sorry, beyond first.
So in my first tournament with Melbourne City, we made the final, but we lost on penalty shootouts.
So you've almost tasted victory. You've fallen at the final hurdle, so I bet that was even sweeter. Talk to me about the experience of playing with Chris Gordon, because he's a player with huge experience. He's got massive pedigree here in England. We know how good he is, but how did it feel to play alongside him and see him up close?
It was definitely an experience. He's someone that, as I said, when I was watching the 2017 World Cup videos, when I first started playing, he was a player that I really looked up to and someone I studied quite hard. So to have him on our team and to learn his ways and learn a bit more about how he plays football, how the English teams play football, that was really valuable, great experience to learn from. And I think it's always great to kind of network with other players from other countries, because sometimes you do get kind of stuck in your ways and you can't kind of see those tiny little things that you need to refine to change your game, and to work someone else who can kind of see the bigger picture. That's always very invaluable.
Yeah, I think to that point, we've seen, I think your last 3 championships, I want to say, have all benefited from bringing someone fresh into the squad. So it was yourself in 2025 with the expertise and the ability of Chris Gordon. I think 2024 Western Sydney Wanderers brought Zach Dickey over. I know Brad Bates has been successful with Newcastle Jets in years gone by. So bringing that little bit of freshness that keeps all the players kind of on their toes and ensures the levels are as high as possible, it certainly helps as long as you can establish that balance, because you don't want these opportunities for international players to be the detriment of players in Australia, because then that will halt the grassroots kind of pathway through to regular activity. I'll get onto the Club World Cup and that aspect in just a second, but forgive my naivety and lack of knowledge around the Australian landscape. Have any other female players won the national championships before you? Putting you on the spot now.
That is a good question, yeah. Well, obviously, I didn't start playing till my first club championship was 2019, so it's quite possible there was a female player before me, but not off the top of my head.
I'll do some digging, because you're certain, to my knowledge, in recent years, you are the first female that I've associated with that trophy, with that club championships. There may have been players prior to you, but irrelevant. It's obviously still going to be a very small number. In June, we saw Western Sydney Wanderers, the 2024 APO Club champions, qualify for and compete at the inaugural FIFA Powerchair Football Club World Cup in Paris. It was a huge moment for the sport. It was a huge moment for Australian club football on the international stage. Did you manage to catch any of that action, Beck?
Definitely, I watched the whole tournament. Although there's a time difference, I did watch the replays, but I definitely was excited to tune in and see how all the different clubs went.
Yeah, it was fascinating to be a part of, to see these different cultures and football interpretations play out on one court across 1 week. It looks like the next edition will land in 2029, I believe. And for that, I imagine there will be a real motivation across Australia to win the 2028 Club Championships, which I suspect will be the ticketing year. Is that something you and other players have already kind of have an eye on for the future?
Yes, I definitely agree. Since Melbourne City won the National Club Championships, it's now our next goal to be able to participate in the Club World Cup. Obviously, as I said before, there's very few opportunities for us to test ourselves on the world stage. So to be able to take our team to a Club World Cup would just mean that we get to kind of see how we go against the best of the best. And I'm definitely an amazing opportunity. So we're definitely working hard to build up a really good squad with a good culture that would enable us to perform well on the world stage.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I would also encourage decision makers, tournament organisers, clubs to be very considerate about that aspect we've spoken about, bringing international players over, because I can already see, knowing how clever and strategic some teams are, they'll be planning for them 2028 club championships and thinking, what's the best possible player we can bring over to ensure that we win it? Do you think there is a piece of work that's needed there just to ensure it's as equitable as possible?
I definitely think so. I think ideally the team that goes to a Club World Cup is comprised of players that play in that country. Obviously, someone say like Chris Gordon, who plays for Melbourne City, if we were to reach the Club World Cup, if the years were different, he would have been playing for his own club team. So I think it's great if we can set a solely Australian team, just to really showcase to the world what Australia, our football is about, without having international players.
Yeah, I mean, Western Sydney Wanderers were fantastic in 2024. They won the club championships with Zach Dickey part of that squad. Correct me if I'm wrong, in 2025 they finished bottom with a very comparable squad, just beyond the omission of Zach Dickey. So you've seen that shift from lifting the trophy to finishing bottom. And I'm not saying Zach Dickey is be the absolute reason for that, but it no doubt had a detrimental effect, him not being there. So I don't want these clubs to be momentarily propped up through these high caliber players and then struggle beyond their inclusion. It's just something I thought about when I was kind of thinking about this.
Yeah, we really want the long-term goal of the
Course.
football club to the clubs to develop their own players. But ultimately, that's what's going to steer a club to long-term success, is if they are able to build up their own players. Obviously, yes, it's fun that it's beneficial to play with other players or international players, but I think it would be great on the world stage if Australia is able to send a solely Australia team to the next World Cup.
Yeah, that would be amazing. But I know. Speaking from experience, we face a very similar dilemma here in England. In recent years, we've had an influx of international players come over and compete in the National League, which has led us to start to regulate overseas players, whereby clubs competing in the National League can only register one overseas player within their squad. That is twofold: to give opportunities for overseas players, but also to protect the integrity of the clubs and the pathways. You don't want an international superstar coming to take a position and playing time off a young, aspiring, developing player. So we've put some sort of guidance in and around it just to help create a balance, and I have no doubt that will be considered for Australia, because I'm really looking forward to that next Club World Cup, especially knowing it should feature teams from the US this time round after they missed out in Paris due to their domestic championships clashing. And when you think about that, strong sides from both the US and Australia combined with South American, European clubs, it's shaping up to be a seriously high quality competition. Excuse me. You've given such a clear picture of the landscape, the competition, the national championships, the geography, the logistical realities, and how that shape Powerchair football and how it works in Australia. And I think for a lot of people listening, especially here in England, it just highlights how different the environment is. And every country has its own version of this conversation. England faces challenges around participation levels and female representation, club sustainability and funding, just like it is the case in Australia, America, and beyond. But for you to look at Australian Powerchair football as a whole, if you could create a wish list, maybe 3 things you'd love to see happen that would genuinely enhance how the sport is played in your country, what do you think they would be? I'm putting you on the spot slightly, but just things off the top of your head that you'd like to see happen.
So obviously, I thought wave advantage would and change the geographical distance, although that would be helpful. I think my first wish list would be to see the Poweroos be financially supported. I think that would make a world of difference to how we are able to compete internationally if we were better resourced and if we were better able to support the athletes involved with the Poweroos. And I think kind of supported the kind of top level, it then trickles down to the bottom levels. So if younger players are able to see, well, I really want to aspire to be a Poweroos, then that would be definitely top of my wish list. I would also love to see more competition in Australia. So as I said before, we already have the one national club championships a year, which is the only chance St. Helena needed to verse players from Sydney or Brisbane. So if we were able to have more competition and more higher level competition, that would be amazing. We used to hold a nationals, which is a state-based competition, alongside the national club championships. but to expect players to self-fund 2 tournaments a year was just a bit too much in the scheme of things. So that wish list item obviously also involves a financial cost that would require sponsors or backing from other organisations or the government. That would be my 2. Then I would love for Australian football to be a bit more recognised on the national stage. That obviously comes down to performance at tournaments like the Club World Cup and the World Cup. So hopefully we will really be able to test ourselves at the next World Cup and really put our stamp on Powerchair football.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into that. But it's great to hear. And as I mentioned, having met Christy and spoken to Joe, 2 new members of the APO board, it's clear just how driven they are to make wishes like that become reality, to increase the prevalence of competitions, to really start to build relationships between you and the Australian Football Association so that you have that support at Poweroos level. And uh, certainly from my short time knowing those 2, their passion, their determination to bring meaningful change is really encouraging. What really struck me was Christy going out of her way, travelling over to England, where she met myself and Adam McAvoy, to learn, to listen, to understand how things operate here. We know we're incredibly fortunate here in England to have 2 full-time paid members of staff working on the sport every single day. And I could see how much that resonated with her, not from a place of comparison, but from a place of possibility. She wanted to understand what has allowed that to happen, and whether a version of that can be replicated in Australia, why the FA support and fund our England team, why there is this full pathway underneath it, which is supported and funded by them. And beyond that, she's such a key driver in pushing forward the sport internationally, particularly championing the ambition to see Powerchair football included in the 2032 Paralympics, which we'll definitely touch on later. So I know there's going to be frustrations. I know there's things you want to see brought in, but I have to say, just in the last 3-4 months, that new board that you've got seem really driven and ambitious, don't you think?
Definitely, I think it's always helpful to see new faces become part of a board. I think it brings fresh energy and fresh ideas. And I think Powerchair Football and Australia could really benefit from that. I think because we are all volunteers, the board members, the coaches, the our staff, sometimes people do get unfortunately burnt out. So to be able to bring on fresh energy, I'm excited to see what they can do for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how we've functioned here in England. I've seen the impact firsthand of bringing someone fresh, someone new into the system. Since Dean Williams became our chairperson, the trajectory of what we've achieved has absolutely skyrocketed in terms of professionalism, communication, strategic planning, the partnerships which have been enhanced tenfold. And I'd love to see that replicated worldwide. It's just about amazing people with the skill sets and experience to push the sport to this absolute full potential, and working together for almost like a shared vision is so important. Before we dive into Sydney being the World Cup or the APO or Argentina, I want to talk about your journey into the Poweroos setup, because that's a story that deserves recognition in its own right. From the outside looking in, you've become one of the leading players in Australia, but that rise clearly didn't happen overnight. It's been a journey that's shaped by perseverance, by learning, taking your opportunities. You've gone from being part of that under 21 setup and now competing in back-to-back major competitions, the World Cup in Sydney in 2023, followed by the APO in Brisbane in 2025, where you helped secure qualification for Argentina in 2026. What has your pathway into the Poweroos look like? Because that aspect of the under 21 element, we have similarities here, but it's different. So can you highlight that as well?
So we were very fortunate in 2019 just because of how small our region is that Australia was invited to submit to the tournament by the 21 team. And I actually had no idea that this was happening until I was appointed the vice captain of the team. And I remember I received the emails being like, Australia under 21 from the heavens. And I'm like, wow, that is very cool. So that was my first introduction to kind of Australian at the international level. And I would say that definitely prepared me in some sense for the World Cup, that's Poweroos selection. I think because of how little opportunities there are in Australia for us to kind of train new players up to be international level ready. For me to have the opportunity to play in the under 21s and to play matches against Japan and New Zealand. It meant that when I then represented the Poweroos at the World Cup, it wasn't my first international experience. So that was kind of my starting entry point into the Poweroos.
No, that sounds amazing. I want to turn back the clock to 2023 because that year marked one of, if not the most significant moment in Australian Powerchair football history, and certainly one in your own journey too. Hosting a World Cup on home soil is something very few players will ever get to experience. The build up, the pressure, the excitement, the expectation, it all no doubt hits very differently when the world comes to your country, your city, and you're representing your flag in front of friends, family, supporters. So I'm really keen to hear how it all felt from your perspective. Before we get into the competition itself, can you take me back to the moment when you got the call to confirm your spot as one of the Australian players? How did it feel knowing you were going to be part of the squad hosting that competition on home soil?
So I actually found out we left our selection right up until our last training camp. It was kind of both country advantage. We were allowed to do that. So on the very last day of our last camp before we have the tournament, we were all called together as a group. And it was kind of like, this is the Poweroos. And it was kind of so incredible to know that. Obviously, as you say, it's a very rare experience that you get to play on your home soil at a World Cup. And it's one that I might not ever get to experience again, given how much we rotate the World Cup around different countries. So it was just incredible and amazing. And it was such a privilege to finally be able to represent the Poweroos as a senior Australian player. Just incredible.
What are your standout memories from the World Cup, both on the court or off it?
Definitely pulling off a crate of gold for the first time. I managed to secure minutes in our first match against the United States. And it's kind of a weird feeling almost to play against players that you've studied and watched on your computer. They're players that I've looked up to my whole career. And then suddenly they're real, like in front of me, playing me. So I know I did a lot of kind of mental work in the lead up to be like, it's okay, they're just players, like you're players, like don't get too starstruck. But it was definitely amazing to be able to experience that. I remember there was one particular day where so many small kids came and cheered us on, and the atmosphere, and they were all cheering on the Poweroos was just amazing. It was so competitive, but you could hardly talk to your teammates on the field.
Yeah, I remember it. I remember it vividly. It's a fairly large venue, that Key Centre, but it was filled to the brim on the most unexpected day, and we didn't have much warning as to the thousands of school children that would be coming in. But I agree that the atmosphere that they provided was absolutely fantastic. And I'm like you. I that was my first experience of a World Cup. And being a commentator, I watch a lot of football on social media, on YouTube and other platforms. And I remember going, that's Abdullah Karim. He was the MVP in Florida. That's Momo Galame, the best player in the world, because it was my first experience with a lot of these players and people. And yeah, it was, in my experience, the best competition I've ever had the privilege of being part of, just because it was the whole package. The venue, the football, the streaming was all absolutely incredible. And at its time, it was a step above anything that had been accomplished in the sport prior. But it was also the setup, the location, the Olympic Park is incredible. The hotels were amazing, and the fact that everyone could go back to the hotels in the evening, socialize together, have that real international exchange. That is why I find it so special, because the stuff that people were doing off the court was just as meaningful as what was being done on it. When you look back at the tournament, what were the biggest lessons you took from that experience, whether that's individually or collectively as a squad?
I'll say personally, you don't really appreciate just how hard it was at international matches until you actually played it, until you're on the court. I've studied hundreds of hours of international matches, but until I played my first minutes against the US, it was kind of like, wow, this is next level football. So that was definitely a learning experience from the World Cup. But I'd say on a Poweroos level, we really learned just how much the sport is evolving and growing on the world stage. I think we went into that tournament almost a bit naive about where Australia stood on the world stage. Obviously we came fourth at the 2017 World Cup, and then we came sixth at the 2023 World Cup. So we would have loved to push those top three teams at the World Cup, but unfortunately we just weren't able to do that. However, we did show promising signs. We took France to 1-0, which was a pretty incredible feat considering the scorelines that they were producing. We also managed to steal a goal off England as well, so there were definitely promising signs, but we learned a lot from that tournament that we brought into the APO Cup, and which we will then bring it to Argentina as well.
Yeah. What impact do you think the World Cup had on powerchair football in Australia more broadly? Do you think it inspired new players? Did it raise awareness? Did it shift perceptions? Or do you feel, and this is from the outside, that there was an opportunity to capitalize even more on that momentum? Because from my own experience working at the various international competitions, I often find myself hoping that the host nation really used that moment, that opportunity, as almost a springboard to push the sport forward, to increase its visibility and to bring in that new wave of players, coaches, supporters. But sometimes it doesn't necessarily materialize in that way.
In terms of the 2023 World Cup, I think Australia did the best with the resources that we had at the time. It was always a fortunate timing that we held our events almost exactly at the same time as the Women's World Cup. So a lot of the football world's attention was focused on the Women's World Cup as opposed to the Powerchair Football World Cup. We did try to leverage off that connection, given that the Women's World Cup was also held in Australia. But I think there could have perhaps been a few opportunities that we leveraged off better. But I think we also did attract quite a few new players. I know when I was walking around the ground and watching the other matches, I would have the younger kids in wheelchairs come up to me and want to talk about the sport and how I play. I remember there was one particular girl in particular. She wanted my signature and a photo, so that was kind of cool. So I think it definitely gave us the platform to showcase Powerchair football, and even now they still use the 2023 World Cup to show what Powerchair football can be and just what our potential is.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's my point. It's just you have a responsibility as host, not just to produce and perform and put a platform on for this incredible world leading football, but use it, use that momentum, use that energy and channel it in a way that inspires the next generation and leaves a lasting legacy. I think that's really important. So that was the World Cup in Sydney, a huge moment on home soil. But fast forward 2 years, and the next major competition arrived, the 2025 APO Cup in Brisbane. For any of our listeners who might not necessarily know the format, the APO Cup is the Asia Pacific Oceania Championships. It's a major competition in its own right, but it also acts as the pathway to the World Cup, with the two top nations earning qualification for next year's World Cup in Argentina. The lineup was fairly fascinating. Japan bring this incredible technical quality. They interpret the game in such a unique way, and the way that plays out, the unpredictability, make them really exciting to watch. New Zealand are somewhat in a rebuilding phase, having seen them in 2023 when they flew over to Sydney to support all of the 10 World Cup nations. I was intrigued to see how they fared in their next competition, or next competitive competition anyway. And then you, of course, had Korea, a real unknown, competing on the international stage for the very first time. Going into the APO Cup, Beck, what were the expectations within the camp? Did you feel confident, nervous, excited, or kind of a mix of everything, knowing what was at stake?
I think personally, I definitely felt all of the above. It was obviously my kind of first international tournament where I wasn't just a bench player. And that kind of brings an added level of responsibility and pressure. I was also privileged to vice captain the team as well, so that also brings a level of pressure to want to perform well for the team. Now, being our first international tournament since the World Cup, it was really our first chance to see how we performed as a team. In those 2 years, we really tried to change and evolve our style of play, learning from the lessons that we experienced at the World Cup. And it was really our first chance to test ourselves and see how we went. But in addition to that, we also had 4 new senior players who made the international debut. And that was really awesome to see how well they performed, given many of them have never experienced the international stage before. But being that the APO Cup is potentially the only international experience we will get before the World Cup, we really wanted to be able to give players that experience. So with all of that, it was really amazing to win the APO Cup back to back with the 2019 APO Cup as well. And then to secure World Cup qualification was just amazing. My first goal when I joined the Poweroos was to win an international tournament, so now I've achieved that. I need to aim for bigger benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been involved in the APO competitions in the past, albeit in a different capacity, at a different stage of your career. How did you rate the level of competition this time around compared to 2019?
So obviously the APO region is quite a developing region. We have a lot of students, for example, the Republic of Korea has never participated in an international tournament before. And as you say, New Zealand is going through a kind of phase of rebuilding their team. So there was definitely a mix of quality. I would say they're probably comparable. But obviously, I have judged the 2019 Cup through my under 21 eyes, where I was a bit starry-eyed and just impressed by everything. um, it was great to see all the teams come back together and to challenge ourselves against Japan.
Absolutely. Talk to me about that final, because watching from afar, it felt like another chapter in what has become a really closely contested rivalry between Australia and Japan. It was the 2-0 draws in the group stage. Absolutely nothing to separate the two sides. And for the first, I think, 18 or 19 minutes of the final, it looked like we were heading into another tight, cagey stalemate. But I have to say, from my perspective, the introduction of Santo Bongiovanni completely changed the game. His precision, his power, and the tempo he brought shifted the momentum instantly in your favour. The first contribution, that assist for Dimitri Leodo Davis, was incredible. Such a clean strike of the ball. And in a match where the margins are razor thin, it needs a moment of quality to break the deadlock. And then early in the second half, that fast kick in ricocheted really unfortunately between the Japanese defenders in such a way where it just simply couldn't stop the second goal. Of course, Japan pulled one back late on, which I'm sure gave you somewhat of a scare.
Yes.
But it didn't take away from the achievement. Australia lifted the trophy. They secured qualification and showed real quality in something that was no doubt a very high pressure final. From your perspective on the court, what was it like to play in that final, to finally get that breakthrough against Japan in a tight tactical contest?
It was definitely nerve-wracking. That's my first kind of international final that I've ever played in. So going into the match, I didn't really know what to expect or how I would feel. But as soon as that first whistle blew, I was kind of just focusing on the job at hand. And I think even though it took us a while to find that first goal, I think as a team, we were focused on what our game plan was and how we wanted to play. It's often very tempting in those type matches to kind of engage in the battles of the castles to try to keep the ball close and under control. But our style of playing is run and fast. So we wanted to keep moving the ball and providing the ball, and then finally, just before the half-time break, then the hard work and the persistence did pay off. And once that goal went through, it was called a goal by the sideline refs. When the whole court just erupted. I know there's that. I don't know if it's because famous yet, but there's the photo of Dimitri cheering alongside the coaches, and I think that just kind of epitomizes how we were all feeling.
It's one of
but
the
it
best pictures I've ever seen in Powerchair Football.
really is. And yeah, but to then up to go from that feeling of elation to then,
Yeah.
okay, there's still another, I think it was like 2 minutes of the first half, and then a whole other half to play. You kind of have to reset to yourself and refocus and move on to the next kind of player. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, you handled it perfectly, and it was a real spectacle to watch online. I loved following that competition, and just to see how it played out in the final. It went your way, and I think deservingly so. Just that extra little bit of quality, precision. When I look at this Australia squad, uh, I think it's one of the strongest I've seen. You've got a really good mix of experience, and emergent talent, to your point, 4 new players coming into the squad and how quickly they would integrate was always one of the unknowns going into that APO. I think Brian Seck looks like a sensational player, someone you can look to build the squad around in the coming years. Santo Bongiovanni, as we saw in that APO Cup final, brings the power, the precision, the game-changing impact from those dead balls. People already know the quality that yourself and Dimitri Lelio-Davis bring to the side, and then you've got someone like Jack Parry. I believe he's the youngest member of the squad.
Yes.
So he represents the next exciting generation coming through. So when you put all of that together, the blend of youth, experience, momentum, it feels like a really promising time for Australian Powerchair football. How do you personally rate the strength and the balance of this current group compared to previous cycles?
I think definitely this cycle we went into it wanting to refresh the Australian team. Obviously our head coach from the last World Cup has retired from coaching, so we have our assistant coach Robbie Wright stepping into the head coach role. And as part of that, he wanted to kind of revitalise the team and give us a fresh new look, fresh new faces. And as we kind of talked about before, bringing in that new talent and those fresh ideas, it really benefits us in sport. I think at the World Cup, we kind of got stuck in what we had done in previous years and what had worked in previous years. But as we know, football is constantly evolving and you constantly have to develop yourself to keep up with those evolutions. So it was really exciting to see the style of football that we were able to play and how these new players all were able to contribute so well to the squad.
Yeah, completely. Talk to me about your coach, Robert Wright, because I know he plays a big role for you. Both, is he your coach at Melbourne City as well?
Yes. Yeah.
So you have that same voice guiding you at club and country level. It must bring a lot of consistency and understanding. What's he been like to work under, and how much influence has he had on your development and confidence as a player?
Definitely. So I first met Robbie as part of Arts 21. He was assistant coaching for Poweroos at the time. And I looked up to him a lot as a coach, knowing that he was part of the Poweroos system. And he would give me little tidbits of ideas and advice. And then moving to Melbourne, he took me under his wing and taught me the system that Melbourne wanted to play. And we really got to test that under Robbie at the National Club Championships. And then once he became head coach of the Poweroos, we were really able to take ultimately the best bits of the Melbourne City gameplay and the best bits of the Newcastle Jets gameplay and really meld those together to come to the style that the Poweroos played at the APO Cup. I think it's great to play under a coach who's so willing to adapt to the football that's being played by other countries. I also appreciate this coaching style. I'm quite a quiet person, but I appreciate a quiet coach who's just silently advocating for you on the sideline. So I think it's a very intelligent coach who's just able to kind of pull out those 1%ers in players and teams. And we saw that success from his coaching the APO.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's been a fantastic 2025 for you both, though, isn't it? The club championships, the first ever, and now the APO. Now all momentum builds towards Argentina. And that's where I want to progress now, because as incredible as the APO Cup achievement was in its own right, there was something maybe even bigger at stake, because that victory earned Australia a hugely valuable ticket to the 2026 FIFA Powerchair Football World Cup in Buenos Aires, Argentina, next October. I think it will be the 5th iteration of the competition, the absolute pinnacle of our sport. It's a stage where every nation, every player wants to perform at their best. And a stage where the margins between success and heartbreak become even finer. For you and this squad who have grown together across multiple cycles and faced so many different nations, Argentina does represent the next step, the next challenge, the next opportunity to compete on that world stage. And that tournament will test every aspect of this exciting new group, technically, tactically, emotionally, mentally. But the chance to represent Australia at a World Cup in South America, in a country with such a rich footballing culture, is something so special, as it will be for England as well. And as we speak today, we already know 8 of the 10 nations who will be competing: Australia, Japan, France, England, Italy, Belgium, Denmark, and of course Argentina. The 2 final places will be decided in the coming days at the America's Cup in Arizona, where Uruguay, USA, Canada, Brazil, and Mexico will battle it out for qualification. Argentina will be part of that tournament, but they've already secured their spot as hosts. And if things play out as many expect, I'm sure you do as well, there's the expectation that USA and Uruguay will likely come through that. That would give us, without question, the strongest World Cup lineup the sport has ever seen. Every single nation has quality. Every matchup is compelling. There are no easy games. And for me, as someone who's watched the sport evolve rapidly over the last 8-10 years, I think it's incredibly exciting to see just how high the level will be in Argentina. I know the squad for Argentina hasn't been finalised and won't for quite some time if 2023 is anything to go off. But it's something every player will have to work towards over the next 12 months. They have to earn their spot. With all of that in mind, how exciting are you about the prospect of competing in Argentina?
Yeah, we saw a glimpse at the World Cup just how passionate South America is about football. So to be able to play a World Cup in Argentina amongst such passionate football fans, I think will be just next level. And I'm sure we'll surpass the noise levels that the Scorpions brought to the 2023 World Cup. So to play football in front of those crowds, the possibility of it is exciting.
Yeah, it really is. You've played against many of these nations before, no doubt picked up valuable lessons. But at the same time, there's still so much you can't fully predict. Even with the streaming, the footage, the availability to go back and look at these players, the way they set up, the individual ways they perform. But we all know that teams change, styles shift, and a World Cup environment is something so intangible. You can't quite prepare for that level of intensity, that level of scrutiny when the eyes of the world are watching. So heading into Argentina, do you think the focus will be more on what you've learned from past opponents, or will it be about Australia playing their own way?
I think it's probably going to be a mix of both. Obviously, it would be a disadvantage to us if we didn't look at how other teams play. But I think we also have to be realistic about how we as a team can perform at the World Cup. Obviously, as we discussed before, the Poweroos face quite a few resourcing and financial barriers to be able to perform at our best level. And I think that's something that we learned from the last World Cup. When you look at teams like the US and England who are fully supported by their national bodies, you could just see the difference in professionalism and focus on the sport. So hopefully that's something that we can improve upon the performance next World Cup. But I think we also just want to stick to our game plan. Obviously, leading up to the APO Cup, we've developed this game style which is fast, fun for us to play, but it kind of showcases just what Powerchair football can be about. So we really want to bring that into the World Cup to show the world how open and attractive Powerchair football can be. And hopefully, if we play our way and play our style, we might be able to challenge for one of those top 4 spots.
And on that, what does success look like for Australia in that competition? Is it about achieving one of those top 4 placements, or is it maybe performing consistently at a high level, or perhaps just using your performances on the world stage to send that positive message back home, something that can help the sport grow in Australia and inspire the next generation?
Yeah, one of our goals will definitely be to perform consistently. We definitely want to challenge those top tiers in our matches. And ultimately, we would love to get back into that top 4. I think that's a really great challenge for us and a goal that we would want to achieve. But ultimately, above that, we just want to perform well and demonstrate what Australian Powerchair football is about.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at those 10 nations, that will be in Argentina, sorry, assuming USA and Uruguay qualify as expected. Um, for me, you've got France, who have led the way. They are the absolute benchmark. They continue to amaze me every time I watch them. Below them, certainly based on the last 2 or 3 major competitions, you've got USA and England. They've normally formed the next competitive tier. And then beyond that, things become a little bit more open and unpredictable. I think it would be a fair assessment, Beck, to say getting points to go against those top 3 teams is going to be incredibly difficult. But against the other nations in the tournament, there's probably, to your point, if you play your way the way you know you can, an expectation that Australia can compete and can get results. Or do you see it that way, or do you see the landscape slightly differently?
I absolutely agree. I think on the last World Cup, there was quite a lot of contention between the top, middle, and bottom of the table. And it was it was sort of predict where generally teams would fall. But I think going to this World Cup, we've seen the likes of Italy and Belgium at the last Euros. They were kind of not really recognised on the international stage for that tournament, kind of underestimated. And then they came out to the Euros and kind of blew away everyone that was watching. So I think definitely leading into Argentina, it's really anyone's game. And I think even the top 3 teams, while they may be at the top, I hope that a lot of the teams can challenge them for points.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, and I can't wait for that tournament. Before we wrap up properly, I want to touch on, almost just in a more overarching sense, the legacy and the future of our sport on a global scale. Because earlier I asked you about your 3 wishes for Powerchair football in Australia, but stepping back, I'd love to understand your dreams for the sports worldwide. What moves us from where we are right now to being recognized as a truly elite global sport?
I think really in order to achieve global recognition, we do need to be included in the Paralympics. I think that would really give us the state for being recognized both globally as a legitimate sport. I think that would also help with our awareness within the general public. Obviously, the Paralympics receives quite a lot of television coverage. So to be able to have our sport broadcast on TV and for not only the general public to see it, but as you say, you can't see what you can't see. So to imagine that little kids might be able to watch us playing Powerchair football on the TVs and for them to be able to think, "Wow, I could do that one day," I think that would just be immensely beneficial to the heights that Powerchair football can reach.
It's all about hitting that mainstream audience, isn't it? I have a few events that I've worked on in the past where it's translated across to a more mainstream viewing audience. That Club World Cup in Paris, as one point of reference, was televised on terrestrial television in France. So every game, full matches were shown. And I know what that's done for the sport in France, because you're getting those new eyes, those new individuals with a disability, seeing what is that? I need to be a part of that. But beyond that, you've got coaches that are more within the mainstream game going, I'd love to be a part of this. Volunteers, supporters. It's not just about reaching the players, it's about reaching and expanding the whole community. And I don't disagree. The Paralympics is the key that unlocks all of that. 2032 being Brisbane is one of the most discussed topics in the Powerchair football community right now, and for good reason. The inclusion, to your point, Beck, at the Paralympic Games would be a complete game changer. It would elevate visibility, it would drive funding, it would strengthen the pathways, open doors for players and nations everywhere. But the reality is we're fighting for a very limited number of slots alongside hundreds of other impairment-specific sports. The competition for inclusion is incredibly fierce, as we've found out in the last 2 or 3 failed applications. But we all know Powerchair football would be an amazing addition. Fast, tactical, dramatic, but accessible. And I watch the Paralympics and I see nothing for individuals in powered wheelchairs, especially team sports. And that's something that surely has to change, don't you think?
I do. I echo exactly what you said. I think with power wheelchair users look at the Paralympics, there's not very many, if any, sports that are accessible to them. You might have one individual sport, perhaps, but there's no team sports that are actually accessible to Powerchair users. So I think the inclusion of a sport like Powerchair football really opens up not only opportunities for Powerchair football, but also just the inclusivity of the Paralympics as a whole too. Obviously, the Paralympics was set up to provide sporting opportunities to athletes with disabilities, and I think it's disappointing that there's not more opportunities for athletes with those higher levels of disability.
Yeah, I completely agree. I believe for us to take that next step, we need to come together as a sport globally. We need alignment, we need structure, we need transparency, and we need the right people in the right roles driving things forward. Another huge part of that global growth is visibility. Not just the broadcasting, but everything every nation does around the sport, the social media coverage, the storytelling, the branding, showcasing the personalities within the sport, and working within an element of communications myself, whether it's the commentary, the social media, this podcast. I know just how powerful visibility can be when people actually see Powerchair football, when they watch it properly, meet the players, feel the energy, it captures them instantly. And that's something we have to continue to replicate at a faster pace than we're currently doing. Because I always say, I challenge anyone to come and watch a game, meet the players involved, and not fall in love with it. We're so close to something really special as a sport. You can feel that momentum building globally with people like Nathan Mayer driving innovation and growth as the president of the US Federation, Christie leading the charge in Australia, and so many passionate people around the world looking and working to push Powerchair football forward. I'm excited to be a part of it. And I genuinely believe in the next few years, it could be really transformative to our game. But to my point, we need that global alignment and transparency. Rebecca, thank you so much. It's been amazing to hear your journey, your insights, your perspective on the sport. I'm really excited to see how you and the team get on over the next 12 months. We won't assume your position within the Poweroos squad because that would be naive for both of us.
Yeah.
But I know you will work incredibly hard to ensure you're at your absolute peak come the latter stages of 2026, and you're part of that that then planned. Saying that, because of the logistical demands for Argentina, it's not as fortunate as hosting a home World Cup. So I suspect just because of transporting chairs and funding, you will have to know the early months of 2026 as to your inclusion or not, don't you think?
Absolutely, and I think the coaching staff already has approached some of the players to ask us would we prefer to to be left as late as possible today, or would we rather know earlier? And I think given the logistics of getting us in our chairs to Argentina, I think we'll definitely know in the earlier half of 2026.
Well, I will be eagerly awaiting that announcement. Before we wrap up, I want to conclude with a little quick fire round. Is that okay?
Exactly.
So quick, instinctive answers. Your proudest moment in Powerchair football?
Winning the 2025 APO Cup.
Nice. Your toughest opponent you faced? I want both a specific player and a nation or team.
So exactly, I would say Germany, and in terms of a team, France.
Nice. Most talented player you've ever played with?
So I'm gonna say Chris internationally, but on a national stage, I played with Luke David with Melbourne City, and I think we liked a really good combo.
Very nice. Your go-to pre-match song to get you hyped up?
Well, if I could guess him. So I've played Perry definitely. So I'll probably say more my training through.
Okay, I'm going to deviate from the quick fire slightly. Can you just tell me about this Katy Perry obsession? Because doing my research, she happened to be everywhere across your social media.
Yeah, so I am a big fan of hers. I grew up with her music and definitely followed me through some of the hard times. So she toured to Australia this year. And me and my twin sister, we followed her around Sydney and Melbourne. So we ended up going to 7 of her shows within like a 11-day period.
I love your profile picture on Facebook. I bet it was amazing to meet her. If you could play one match in any stadium in the world, where would it be?
So I've got to be honest, outside of Powerchair Football, I don't actually follow football.
It can be an arena. It can be where you've watched a concert.
I love Italy as a country, so I'm going to say an arena in the courts.
Very nice. And finally, the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I would say to trust your instincts. Often, as players, we receive a lot of coaching, specific instructions, but once you get on the club, you just have to trust your instincts and play what's in front of you.
Very nice. And that wraps up episode 40 of the 2-on-1 Powerchair Football Podcast, powered by MK Battery. A massive thank you, as always, to everyone tuning in and continuing to support the show. Of course, an enormous thank you to MK Battery for their ongoing support and commitment to powering this podcast. And a massive thank you to Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.